Welcome to Rauta's Reviews, and this time we have one of the infamous bands from Sweden called Shining. Now, Shining has been active for quite some time and not always getting that attention in good and positive ways. Whereas the early years went with the band all the way to kind of suicidal, self-harming topics and very, very dark places. In a way, the man behind the band, Nicholas Kvarford, has always been kind of a peculiar case. And I'm not saying that in a bad sense, but also in a bad sense. As a lot of people who have been following his interviews and his online commentary and all that stuff, that guy is able to really burn bridges and make some harm along the way. But then again, he can also be a charismatic person, husband and all that stuff. So man of many faces, man of many talents, and also, it seems, a lot of mental issues. Now, it's time to talk about Shining, not Nicholas Kvarford, as much as the band identifies with the man itself, being vocalist, songwriter, lyricist and all that stuff, and of course, face for the band. But he's not doing this alone. This is not a solo project, but a real band. And whatever I'm saying here, some people will say like, no, it's not like that. And some people will be nodding their heads like, if only you knew half the truth. But we're not here to talk about Shining as a band. We're talking about the latest album, self-titled album, Shining. And that comes with a kind of horrible and at the same time cool cover. However, if I was to make a guess, wild guess based on the cover alone, I would say this must be some death metal band going back to 90s and doing some old school death metal. Yes, it's bloody, it's gory, and it's horrifying, but it's kind of a sympathetic. Hard to describe unless you really know what kind of background I'm coming with all the bands and stuff. Now, Shining's album career has been lasting for about 23 years now. The first few years went without band doing albums and like normal bands tend to do, or at least used to do back in the days. It was all about doing demos and whatnot before going to the albums and all that stuff. So past 20 years plus, the band called Shining has been doing their albums in such fashion that basically there's a new Shining album every 2 years. However, if you take a look, and I will show you what I mean as soon as I've been unboxing and showing you the CD here, the band's pace has been a little bit different for the past few years. Now, whereas every other album before this one came out between a year or two before that, the next album, I mean, first 20 years were basically like album every year or second year, at least maximum of 3 years between each one. Now it's been 5 years since the previous album, and to be honest, in my opinion, Shining has stepped at least the third era with this album. This is not something that is easy to explain, but I'll do my best. And as you can see here, there are more people in the band that you might think of based on random photos on the side and all that stuff. Curiously, what I noticed is that one of my friends, Tuomas, who's actually drawn a Rauta logo as well, is now part of the band lineup with Cacophony listed as his instrument or skill set, where others are guitarist, drums, bass, and of course Nicholas Crawford as vocals and piano. Worth mentioning is, before I let this go, is like Nicholas Barker or Nick Barker doing drums. Being one of the most talented extreme metal drummer in the business, his skills are never out of fashion, so to say. We all wish him the very best with health issues and all. But now it's time to talk about Shining, which a lot of people know as being band with suicide, depression, evil, misanthropy and all that stuff being the lyrical themes of the band, and as such, not for everybody. Those who are looking for more, say, satanic approach to black metal, or just being more poetic with atmospheric stuff and all that stuff, might not find Shining as their cup of tea at all. But I would say Shining has always been its own path kind of a band. That is, it has always been carving its own path, and while at it, probably burning a lot of bridges with weird comments like I mentioned in the beginning with the intro and all that stuff. I, however, find the band fantastic and interesting since the very first album and all that stuff, and I guess I've been a fan of Shining maybe more than Nicholas Kvarford so much, and it's been interesting to see how the band has evolved and changed over the years. But much like a lot of other Shining people, being fans, followers, what have you, I felt that the band later on started to go into a little bit different direction these past couple of albums here before this one. It's not like they were bad, but I mean, I think the band reached its climax, the peak moment for me anyway, around albums number 3 and 5. Angst maybe being the best album with a pile, but if you can look at the Metal Archives list, people are very, very varied with that. Some say the early ones were decent, then it got to the best parts, then started slow decline, and somehow the eighth album was a big, I don't know, disappointment for some people, and now it's been going up and down ever since. But these are just random takes, maybe more say wider approach to Shining as albums would be if you were taking a look at radiomusic.com. That is RYM. But however, here we're not talking about the consensus about Shining. We're talking about my take on the album, and you're of course feel free to disagree or agree or something between. Now, for me, Shining as the self-titled album is kind of a start of a new era. Like I said, the band has been going through different parts, different phases throughout the years, and I think that's very, very common for bands that are more like 20 years old, especially now that Shining basically is almost 30 years of age, which is a long career by all means. Now, whereas the old albums were more like kind of a traditional second wave black metal in so many ways, even though going more into these self-destructive and misanthropic ways, and rather as opposed to, say, more aggressive bands like Marduk and the like, or more satanic bands, or those atmospheric bands, Pete Burzum or Druid or whatever. Shining has been doing the stuff from Nicholas Crawford perspective, and that is not something that is easy to digest. For example, if you see Shining on stage, you might feel it's highly entertaining, even a kind of I don't know, flattering to the audience, kind of a rock and roll stuff. But when you combine that with the music, which is very, very far away being this kind of a rock and roll music, or rock black and roll, whatever you want to call it, it's a kind of a weird paradox. It's almost like oxymoron in so many ways. They don't really click. What you see on stage is very different from what you pick from the albums, and Shining as the album is no exception to that. Now, I would say this is a very, very nicely matured album, so maybe those 5 years actually are worth the time. First of all, let's talk about the production. This album sounds organic and strong at the same time, which is by no means an easy task. A lot of those so-called organic bands seem like they're going for some kind of a 1970s kind of a production values. So really sounding something that isn't so strongly distorted, so strong, but more like, yeah, this is sounds like us jamming at the rehearsal room. And then bands which are so often overly produced end up sounding like plastic bands, as if the drums were made by some machine and the guitar sound are like lacking the air, so to say. I mean, it's so often that you either go from one of the opposite extents, and I don't know, sometimes it just feels like, how come the skill to do good sounding album, sounding organic but still strong, how that is come missing? Unfortunately. I mean, sorry, fortunately rather than unfortunately, the thing is not that case with the Shining. Shining album, in my opinion, is close to perfection sound, especially with this kind of music. Whether we're talking about acoustic guitars or Nicholas Barker's mid-tempo jamming with the drums, instruments sound perfect. Whether it's about hi-hat sounds or snare drum or kick drum, guitars, everything is very, very nicely balanced. When I would say very nicely, I really mean close to perfection kind of stuff. That is then again topped with Niklas' clean vocals and the more black metal raspier vocals. And I think the job done here is solid. It's really, really good. When it comes to songwriting, I would say this is both the new era of Shining as well as going to back to basics. That is going to back to the early 2000 albums where it was all about creating this very, very dark mood and all that stuff. When we are talking about extreme metal, however, black metal in particular, I would say this is a kind of a light black metal. This is not the aggressive stuff. This is not the super dark. This is by no means raw and fierce kind of a black metal. So which corner you would put Shining? Because it's not really atmospheric black metal. It's not definitely like some Marduk and Tudor with, machine gun fire aggressiveness, warlike approach. Nor is it like Burzum kind of atmospheric parts. It's somewhere closer to that territory, but then again not sounding like one of those nature-sounding pagan black metal bands, which are all about very close to going very folky and going a deep end with their synthesizers and whatnot, being like warm albums about nature and all that stuff. Now, Shining is like an urban take of that. So in a way, it's kind of atmospheric, but it's also kind of a dark. But then again, it's not like those raw crawl down into dungeons and go die into catacombs kind of a black metal, but somewhere in the middle. both in production and songwriting, and this rather warm approach to, vocals, be it clean ones, and acoustic guitars and all that stuff. Actually, there is even a part, kind of a longer part, but nonetheless part more than defining album kind of a thing. It reminds me of Therion with the kind of a background choir vocals and all that stuff, which makes it fascinating. It's almost like we're kind of finding something new, a small niche maybe, but still nonetheless a kind of a small place where no other bands are willing or unable to go to. So it's like a more small place between this part of black metal and that part. And there is this small marginal, small tiny piece where shining is seeping in. I don't know, like some kind of a slime, kind of organic, but at the same time not really human at all. That being said, I find this album very interesting. I find it good and I am enjoying listening to it. So whatever you were thinking about the man behind the band, I think it's very important to be able to separate the art from the artist. Maybe it's also important to put them together and then separate them once again, because there would be no art without the artist. But then again, the artist is barely the same thing as the art he or she is creating. So whatever it's worth, I think this is a good album. And the reason I made this lengthy reviews, there's so many details to talk about, and maybe we could talk about for an hour. When it comes to lyrics, by the way, they're all once again in Swedish. So unless you're talented in Swedish or willing to use translation tools, you're not gonna be able to read them. This package looks beautiful. Released by Napalm Records. Thanks to the label for sending this one. This will go to my personal collection because it's a really good one. Else I wouldn't have even requested it from the label. So, whatever it's worth, go check out New Shining. I hope you won't be disappointed. I certainly am not. So, there it is. You will find links provided in the description box. Now off you go and enjoy. Bye bye.